Today on the channel I'm going to make a scorpion mask from Mortal Kombat 2021. Pretty excited to see this. There's a link to patterns below if you'd like to attempt to make one of your own. And without me rambling on anymore, let's just go ahead and get over here. All the main numbered pattern pieces are 6mm thick EVA foam. You're going to need one of each, number 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll also notice it's marked with inward angled cuts. Means you need to do an inward cut this way. I actually do this using scissors and cut out the center with an xacto knife. It's easier for me to make the angled cuts on the 3 and the bottom of the 4s, and on both number 2s using the scissors. To glue all these pieces together, I use contact cement. DAP and Barge are probably the two best brands. How contact cement works, if you haven't used it before, is you brush some on each surface to be bonded. You allow it to sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes 20, depending on how humid your environment is. Once all of the adhesive is no longer wet and sticky and it's dry, you can then line them up and glue them together. Now that I've had enough time for all the adhesives to cure and dry, I am going to join them together. First the number 1 pieces to the number 2, and then the number 3 on top of that, followed by the number 4 on each of these. I'm lining up as well as possible the registration marks while trying to keep all the seams even. Contact cement is very much a one and done thing, so without a solvent or ripping or cutting it apart, once it's stuck together, it's stuck together. After I get the two halves assembled, I go ahead and join those two together to get the basic face mask. This is my cheapo dual setting heat gun. Depending on what part of the world you live in, these can be rather inexpensive or rather expensive. Mine is a Harbor Freight Drill Master heat gun, dual setting. Depending on how much you use it, they can last 3 months or they can last a year. I use the heat gun on high just to help tweak out the shape a little bit, curve in some of the areas, and pull up the nose a little bit. And as it periodically disappears off screen, I'm actually matching it up to my face. Once I get done shaping it a little and it cools, then I go back to heating again and repeating this process until it fits me in a way that is comfortable, not too tight, not too loose. Ultimately going to attach this with elastic. And here is the finished heated shape and what it looks like. First accent pieces are A and B, and these are going to be glued together so that they form something that looks like this. Again, using contact cement, I apply it along the edge where the slant is, and that's the edge that I actually cut. Now on the other one, I put it on the inside of where the slant is, right along the edge here. Once it's been 15 minutes, I join the two together so that they come out looking like this. You're going to need to do this twice so that you have one for each side. So flip the patterns and repeat. To glue these on, I apply the contact cement from the bottom where the 1 and 2 connected, up along underneath where the number 3 joins to the combined number 1 and 2, up to the squared edge at the end, and then on my combined accent pieces, I take and apply the contact cement just along the edges of it so that it's not going to get stuck anywhere other than exactly where I want it, which is just on that edge. I think you could probably find a square dowel, EVA foam dowel that you could cut down the center that would be flexible enough instead of making this piece. I believe Yaya Han does sell some, but I'm not sure what size you would want. I glue these on by starting basically lining up in the middle, covering up the seam of the 1 and 2, running it up along to the end there where my squared end is on both sides, trying to make it as even as possible, and I kind of used the cutout lines as a guide there, so it's as even as possible on both. Next is the accent pattern labeled C, and this one is 6mm EVA foam, and you'll need 2 of those as well, one for each side. A little bit off the back edge of these, this part here, just trimming off the corner. It saves me from having to use a Dremel. I suppose it's not necessary, but I did it, so I'm going to show it. And same as before, there's contact cement to glue these on, applied evenly to the pieces, and then right along the combined A and B accent, you're going to glue these in, slightly covering the accent hole going towards the rear of the number 2. And there I start by putting down the back and lining it up with my A and B, and then just laying it down even, and repeat this over on both sides. The Mod Podge that I put on the edge for the accent does take a while to dry, so while that was drying, I cut out my D accent pieces from 2mm EVA foam, and you need 2 of those, one for each side. These just get lined up and glued on either side of the jaw. I do have them hanging off on both edges, about 1mm or so. Next, the E pattern pieces, which are cut from 2mm EVA foam. And for this, I not only put my contact cement on the side here, but I also put it up on this top edge right here. When gluing these on, kind of like the previous piece, I have it hanging down about 1mm or so off the actual bottom of the number 2 piece as I glue it on. And then of course fold and wrap that piece over. So I measured out and marked every inch or so and drew some lines here and followed straight along basically the registration marks. This is so that as I'm gluing on this entire center accent piece, I have something to look at to help me line it all up and make sure that everything is even. Next I have F and G. There's 2 G's, 1 F, both 2mm. And for this I contact cemented again around the edge, onto the back, at the bottom, and the sides. The F pattern piece, I'm going to line up right across the center, and from there I use my various marker lines that I've put on it to have a basis to make sure everything's as even as possible, and I fold all the extended pieces over. Any of the excess that I may have, I cut off using a sharp pair of scissors. And then the G pieces, I just line up along the sides, and similar to the others, I'm going to fold them around the bottom until they're in place, trimming off the excess as well. Next, I have the H pattern piece, which is 2mm, and you're going to need 2 of those. Using contact cement, I apply these where the combined seam of the 3 and 4 join together in the center, and follow them around underneath the combined A and B accent pieces, overlapping onto the C. The I accent pattern piece as well is 2mm EVA foam, and it's going to go right through here, which is right in between those lines I drew for my registration marks, so I could line everything up. Again, contact cement, and I don't actually contact cement it to the base number 1, just over the accents. And then 2 J accent pattern pieces, also 2mm EVA foam. They're going to get started here and wrapped around and under the mask. This was a little bit awkward to line up and put on, but as I add each piece to this and each layer, it looks a little bit better and a little bit closer to the reality of what I'm hoping to achieve. The K accent pattern piece is cut out of 6mm EVA foam, and it's meant to go on the bottom there where the chin is. Now, if you happen to have yours more broad or more closed in than mine, this may not fit. However, you can just trace one by sitting this down and tracing around the outside edge. So that concludes pretty much all the pattern pieces. From here, I'm going to do several things. One is I'm going to cut. I do this freehand. Suppose you could use a square or a ruler and an X-Acto knife, but I've never had much luck with that. So I use scissors. And I'm basically cutting as close as I can to 2mm strips of 2mm EVA foam. And this will give me thin little pieces that I can work with to do a bunch of the accents that I'm not going to do with an X-Acto knife. I'm going to use my X-Acto knife to cut some detail lines into things, and I'm going to do that looking at a reference photo. I'm going to draw them on first with a Bic pen, so I have a guide for my X-Acto knife. I've drawn on all my guides for my cuts, so I'm going to go ahead and make all of them real quick using an X-Acto knife. Anytime you use an X-Acto knife or anything, understand it's a razor, so be very careful. You could also do these cuts prior to gluing on the pieces. I just prefer to do it after. That's just a personal preference. It's definitely not a necessity. It is easy to slip, and if you don't have a lot of experience, you should always put safety first. I've done this for almost a half decade or something at this point, so I feel pretty confident. And as these are all finishing up, I have my contact cement drying on the 2mm strips of 2mm foam, and I'm going to start placing them on now just to do all the accents. And some of these I debated cutting, but I decided just to have a good looking finished product, I might as well put in the extra time and effort. The one that I'm doing on the chin here was rather tricky, and I did draw out with a Sharpie where I wanted it to go prior to trying to go ahead and glue everything into place, just because I knew if I tried to eyeball it, it just wouldn't work out. Well, that's it with all the little thin strips of EVA foam in my cuts. I did use the heat gun to open up my cuts a little bit, but I didn't film that. Now I'm going to start doing some other weathering and stuff to this. So I have my heat gun just sort of sitting on a block on the floor, and I'm using it to heat up this small Phillips head screwdriver just to kind of gouge up and poke holes and make the foam have an interesting texture in this area of like the nostrils and kind of the mouth area here. All that so far. Now, I'm not going to do the damage. I know that, well, initially when I saw like promotional posters and stuff, I thought it was supposed to be like Frost, like he was fighting Sub-Zero. But since looking at more promotional images and just the trailers and pausing it and looking at it, looks like some sort of damage occurred and they repaired it here and in this whole area in through here. Now, I'm not actually going to weather this piece like that, whatever, but if I would do that, I would probably use my Dremel to sand down a lot of the area first, just to make it look like it had already been worn away, and then use some hot glue, and on top of that and around that and with that, probably some more of this Mod Podge Dimensional Magic to create that effect prior to primering and painting it. I used my Mod Podge Dimensional Magic to put some more accents on each side, allow that to dry, and then I want to make double sure that none of this contact cement is going to loosen over time for any reason, and I use super glue to just seal along all of the exposed seams and areas to make sure that it's not going to come apart. This probably isn't necessary. I'm just overly protective of certain projects like this that I make, where I want them to just make sure they're not going to come apart and they're going to last as long as possible. And I have my hot glue gun heating up because I'm going to use it to sort of backfill in some of the overlapping areas on the base numbered patterns from the accent patterns. Alright, this has had about 45 minutes, an hour for all the super glue I used to seal all the little worrisome areas. And I'm going to go ahead and seal this with Mod Podge and some paint brushes. I don't do a bunch of multiple coats on this. I just do basically one good coat and try to keep the brush directions going with the direction of the pattern pieces as much as possible and try to keep that consistent. I try not to let it glob up anywhere. If it does, I try to get it like out of those nooks and crannies. But it's, I feel, the most thorough way to get this sealed. I'm not using anything aerosol like Plastidip or Flex Seal or anything like that, because sometimes it just doesn't get where you need it to get in pieces like this that have so many little areas and things going on between the texturing that I put in on the nose and mouth area to just all the various pieces and how they're layered. Alright, I primered this all black. Now I'm gonna put a very light layer of Createx Wicked Gold. As far as the airbrushing goes, I don't put a lot of it on there. I didn't try so much to match the movie colors as I wanted to just do my own thing, but I just applied it from about a 2-3 foot distance in light little bursts just to get a nice even gold coat over it. After that, I take Model Masters Gold and I just hand brush and paint all of the rest of it, and dry brush and then sort of highlight with a little bit thicker applications of paint. Okay, well, all that's left to do now is just wait for all this to dry and put some elastic on it and try it on. I do want to point out that the movie version, this is not like a black gold like I did this by just dusting it with the airbrush. It looks like somewhere between a rose gold and a copper. I'm not sure what color it is, but this is not it. But I like the black and gold, so that was a personal preference and choice. I tried to show it in a few different like indoor and outdoor lighting so you can see just how it looks. Well, that's going to pretty much wrap that up. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Patrick for sending in this awesome photo of a Punisher vest that he made a couple years ago. Still fits him, still looks great. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe, as it does help out the channel a lot. As always, thank you for watching, and have a great day.